Hi there, welcome to Bible/Chat. Gus, hi.
Hi, John.
We're having technical difficulties because everything we do is like refugee living.
Yes.
But it's fine.
Yes, that's totally fine. Why wouldn't it be fine?
Look, from all of our listener...
From the one listener, it is great.
Yeah.
And sometimes we even offend people.
Person.
Person.
Okay, so we have a question that came up from our local question asker.
Yeah.
To protect the innocent, we'll just call him James. James asked a fantastic question. Does every sermon have to have Jesus in it?
Yes.
Okay, you're
Next
preaching
question.
from the old...
Next question.
You're totally unhelpful. Bible/word. No.
Yes, James.
Yes, James. So you're preaching from the Old Testament. You're preaching a text like 1 Samuel, for example, or you're preaching a text like, let's just take an example. David and Goliath.
Yeah.
Okay, how do you get that text to Christ, right?
Yeah.
Like, how would Jesus be in a sermon about David and Goliath? Can't you just say, listen, you should be like David. He trusted God. He fought the giants in his life. I can fight the giants in my life. Does Jesus need to be
If I was spiritualizing, and yes, I would do that, of course.
Right.
And I think that what happens is when you're teaching through the Old Testament, it can become very easy for us to look at a passage in the Old Testament and feel like I need to do what, in this case, David is doing.
Which he was faithful.
Yes.
Yeah.
And which that doesn't mean that he's being a bad example. Right?
He was a bad example later.
Yeah, he was plenty bad later.
Yeah.
But in that case, he's probably being a good example. But the point of the sermon shouldn't be like David, although it's fine to use him as an example of someone who looked at the issue wasn't the fact that he was better than the rest of the people.
Right.
He trusted the Lord.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately you need to think about what is the principle of it, and it doesn't teach moralism.
Right.
It doesn't teach be better.
Yeah.
It's teaching there how he trusted in the Lord.
Yeah.
And so how do you get to Christ with that? Well, you can, right? You definitely can.
Yeah.
Without saying, well, David is Christ.
Yeah.
And Satan is actually Goliath.
Yeah, that's the fast turn, right?
Yeah. We wouldn't do that.
No. Yeah.
So that would be
David is Jesus.
Yeah.
Satan is Goliath.
Yeah.
He cuts off his head.
Yeah.
It all works together.
Yeah.
We're good. Yeah.
Wait, come on.
No, that's too fast.
Yeah. So I think that how you need to get to it is, once you explain the text, you have to explain what the text is. You have to explain what it meant to the normal Jewish person who was reading this, or was hearing this as a child.
Yeah.
And then, but then you need to cross the river, the principle, and bring it to us and say, well, what does it mean?
Yeah.
Not only that, what it meant then, but what does it mean to us today?
Yeah, totally.
And,
which is really, I think, like what you said there at the beginning. Like, what did it mean to the immediate reader?
Yeah.
Why tell this story of him killing a giant?
Yeah.
Well, because it's showing that he's the rightful king.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, he's the anointed, but he's the rightful one who should be the king.
And that's how you get to Jesus.
Yeah.
Because you show how he is the rightful king.
Yeah.
How he is the one who cares more about, God's honor than he cares about his own honor. And later, God is going to make this amazing covenant with him in 2 Samuel 7.
Yeah.
And one of his, descendants will sit in the throne, which is going to be everlasting, that messianic king.
Yeah.
And that's how you get to Jesus.
Yeah.
Without just saying, look, David is Jesus. All right? That's not even helpful if you think about that.
No, it's totally unhelpful, yeah. Because
So,
you're like, okay.
all right,
so
how do we get this?
So what you're seeing then is not so much like David per se, but you're seeing God's faithfulness to the people of Israel and ultimately to us by identifying this guy who then he will make the covenant with. Like he's the rightful king. He's the one from whom will come the Messiah. Yeah. And like we're seeing him identified. That's super helpful. So that kind of an interpretation, you do get to Christ. Yeah. You move toward Christ through the covenant, through the promises, through the faithfulness of God. Not through David, and not just by like shortchanging the text and saying David is Jesus.
Well, because then what you're doing is what you're saying is it doesn't matter what this text means.
Yeah.
Or meant to the Old Testament saint. It matters what it means to me. Yeah. So what is the difference between saying that to saying, hey, Acts 2 says, talks about Pentecost, so I'm going to talk about our church.
Yeah.
Instead of just saying, no, what does it mean then?
Yeah.
So it could very well lead to spiritualizing the text, principalizing the text, moralizing the text, instead of looking at what was the point. Like you said, the point was to to show that David was the legitimate king of Israel, and later on, God was going to raise one of David's, sons to be the Messianic king.
The legitimate king. Yeah. In many ways, I mean, that's which to me I think is doing justice to the text itself.
Yeah.
Because the text doesn't say David is the Messiah.
Yeah.
It doesn't say Goliath is Satan. It doesn't, and we don't want to preach it like a rabbi. No. Like, oh, here's the So what it does show is David deserves that kingly place because he does love God, and from his loins will come the one who will ultimately be the one who truly deserves the kingship.
Yeah, and I wouldn't just go 1-to-1. Well, because David did this, Jesus is going to do this.
No.
I don't see that happening either. So again, I think
it's more about his role.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So this is super helpful. So let's take that. That was an example, but let's principialize that. So with enough work, would you say that you can always find God's purposes that lead to Christ, as opposed to just like a 1-to-1 connection?
Yeah, I think so. Not long ago, we were looking at a passage. We tend to do this. We tend to spiritualize a passage, right? So there's that passage when you're looking at Isaiah and Jesus, and he's talking about how. You shouldn't be afraid that when you're going through the water. Just that passage that is constantly on those nice plates that you put. It's very you send that to someone. You're writing a thank you card, and you're writing that passage. But really, what you're doing is shortchanging scripture there, because that's not speaking of John Buck.
Right.
What he's speaking usually about Israel.
Yeah.
And because it's speaking about Israel, then you can see, well, that's God's faithfulness right there. It has nothing to do with you having a tough time teaching physics.
Right.
Sorry.
Why are you mocking me right now?
Not physics. Young adults.
Whatever.
But what it does, he is talking about God being faithful.
Yeah.
And when I look at that, and I think of, for example, a passage that we've left, a ton, Jeremiah, right? Yeah. And God has good plans
for
you, not plans of evil. I mean, he's talking right there to Israel, who is captive, and he's telling them, look, I'm going to bring you back. That speaks of God's faithfulness to the covenant. And what we should see is how God is being faithful, and not just say, hey, that myopic way of looking at things. It's about me.
Yeah,
God has got
that verse
good plans, for me, and then
which is true. He does have good plans for us.
But I wouldn't go to that passage.
Yeah,
right?
And even in that context, he says, I wanted to bless you, and you wouldn't. And so what I'm going to do is take you into captivity. It's going to be a miserable time, and then I'm going to bring you back again, and you'll have tender hearts, which is his hope, right? But that's
and that's the question that I would say to someone. Someone sends me that passage, or someone. I would say, well, when is my captivity?
Exactly.
Read
the next verse.
Wouldn't it be easier for us to just say, well, that speaks of God's faithfulness. Look at him. Oh, that speaks of God. And that would be the principle to us. And that's even more glorious than just to say he's got good thoughts for you.
Yeah.
I can go to another passage to say that in the New Testament.
Yeah, totally. Because then we're fixing our eyes on God and not on our circumstance. Yeah. Like, God has good plans for me. My focus is on the circumstance, not on God. He actually is faithful to me, even if what I see appears to not look like good plans. Yeah. That's super helpful, Gus. Thank you. I hope that's helpful for you. Maybe we'll do a couple more texts. Maybe I'll have you do a couple more texts. Gus is our resident Old Testament scholar. He did way better in Hebrew than I did. My Hebrew is very rough, but his is strong. So we may do a couple other texts. Maybe we'll have you exegete a couple passages and apply them a little bit. So that'd be great. Come on, you're fine. Anyway,
you're fine.
Hope that's helpful.
It's fine.
You'll do what you're told.
Yeah.
I have plans for you. Plans for good.
Not for evil.
Hope this is helpful for you. If you have any questions, you can always email us at info@faithbibleoc.org. Thanks so much.